Get ready to enter the Thrive Time Show.
We started from the bottom, now we here. We started from the bottom and we'll show you how to get here. Started from the bottom, now we here. We started from the bottom, now we here.
We started from the bottom, now we're on the top. Teaching you the systems to get what we got. Colton Dixon's on the hooks, I break down the books. Z's bringing some wisdom and the good looks. As the father of five, that's why I'm alive. So if you see my wife and kids, please tell them hi. It's the C&Z up on your radio. And now 3, 2, 1, here we go.
We started from the bottom, now we here. We started from the bottom and we'll show
Yes,
you how to get
yes, yes, and yes. Thrive Nation, if you're out there today, it's very rare that we will trick highly educated people to be on the show. It's very rare. We have interviewed Dr. Laurie Santos from Yale.
Yes, we have.
We had the late, great Clayton Christensen from Harvard on the show.
Yes.
And now we have yet another person who is smarter than me on the show.
Smarter than both of us put together.
Dr. Miller here, the director of Princeton University Faith and Work Initiative. Dr. Miller, welcome on to the Thrive Time Show. How are you, sir?
Well, I'm fine, and I just can't wait to see how this flows here. You guys are pretty hot. I've never heard opening music like that before. I love it.
Oh, man.
Well, just wait. We're just getting started. We're just getting warmed up.
I tell you what, if you brought us onto the campus of Princeton, there would be a lot of complaints, but soon everyone would have their own intro.
And there'd be restraining orders there shortly thereafter, and it would be chaos. Cats and dogs would be living together by the time we got out of there. It'd be crazy.
I love it. So you guys essentially are the click and clack of this business, right?
Absolutely.
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes.
All right, so here's the deal now. I had the article that was written about your research emailed to me
By a person, and then text to me by another person. And they said, you'd like this. That's basically the summary. And the article is titled, Davos Turns to the Bible for Advice on Trust. For those who haven't read the article, what are you talking about?
Well, gosh, there's study after study, and there's articles, both academic studies as well as just sort of common sense surveys, where people are saying that they increasingly do not trust the institutions of society. And that could be government, it could be the corporate world, frankly, it's the church, it's a number of things. And the trust is, people talk about a trust deficit. So I just got to thinking about how, because most companies I know, they're fine people and fine organizations, and they're trying to do the right thing. And even good companies screw up from time to time and have mistakes. But after you have a mistake, whether it's sort of been a systemic part of who you are or a one-off mishap, how do you restore trust? How do you get your shareholders, your stakeholders, your clients, or even your employees to have trust in you again? And I was having a conversation with a client I do consulting work with, and they said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, you might turn to religion for some ideas. And they looked at me like I had three eyes. And I said, well, so what do you mean? They said, well, religions are really good at helping people think through a path back to get right with God, to get right with their neighbor or their spouse, whatever it might be. They give pathways to healing, pathways to getting back into a state of trust with community. So that's what prompted this whole venture into what led to this white paper that we wrote.
Let's say that I am the CEO of McDonald's. Or former CEO of McDonald's. And I decided to date an employee, hypothetically, and I was then fired. In your opinion,
totally hypothetical.
Totally hypothetical.
Totally
Very
hypothetical.
theoretical. How does somebody go about getting trust back with the organization? How do you do that? And should a boss be fired for violating their own policies and dating their employees?
Well, gosh, there's a few questions there. So for starters, you have to say what's the policy, and if the policy says you cannot date anyone who reports to you, and if you're the CEO, by definition, that means everyone reports to you, directly or indirectly.
Right.
So you got to follow the policy, or else your employees will quickly view you as a hypocrite, and your leadership will be damaged, and your credibility slowly erodes. So if you have that policy, you got to follow it. And more companies are not. How should we say? They're not giving someone a mulligans or a second chance. You breach it, it's proven, you're gone.
Even in small business, what if you have like 20 employees? I think some people in small business say
small business.
It's a small business here, doctor. It's a small business, doctor. And even though it's a small, so it's not big.
What would you say if a this is here's a very specific situation. We had a thriver who emailed in a question, and they have a business that's doing over $100 million of revenue. True story, over $100 million of revenue, and they know that their boss is having an affair with one of the coworkers, and they emailed in wanting to know, how do you handle it? What would you say to a boss out there that's having an affair with a coworker? Walk us through this idea. Should the boss be fired immediately? Done. No questions. Boom. Done.
Well, that's obviously a trickier conversation, because chances are a company of that number of employees may not have formal HR policies dealing with this scenario. Chances are there's not an ultimate recourse, because if it's an owner-founder, they hold all the cards. There's asymmetric power. Unless there's a true independent board, but chances are that just might be fellow family members. So your options are few. It also, I think, another differentiating character in this fact plan that or fact pattern you're describing is it an affair, or are they both single consenting adults? There's slightly different dimensions to it, different moral ramifications.
As a quick editor's note,
they are who we thought they were, and we let them off the hook.
Thanks, Coach.
But as a practical matter, in either case, that could cause disruption, jealousy, preferential treatment, or the perception of preferential treatment. So based on someone's confidence in themselves and the reputation of the CEO, someone might choose to go to that person or the HR office and say, look, do what you want, but you need to know this is hurting your credibility. People are thinking that whoever it is getting preferential treatment, and the only reason the person's being promoted or had a raise or whatever is just because of the relationship. And I don't think you want those sort of rumors going around. You just need to kind of think about what you do with it. But even then, it's a gutsy thing. A lot of people, the old saying, don't shoot the mailman. So, or male person, those are tough things. The reality is they are tough things.
So, Dr. Miller, let's say that you got hired by the Houston Astros. Let's say the Houston Astros reached out to you.
Oh, God.
And they
Play
said,
ball.
And they said, here's the deal.
Hang on, is that a garbage can I hear in the background there? I can't quite tell.
Exactly. So if you let's say you got a call from these guys, and they said, here's the deal. We have been cheating a little, and you say, okay, a little. Every game, yeah, every game
for years.
And we're trying to restore trust, because our first PR strategy was to say we're not guilty, we have never cheated. Then we doubled down by saying we would never, ever cheat, and now we're busted
until the World Series.
Right. And what advice would you have for an organization like the Houston Astros, where the team has been caught systemically cheating, to restore trust with the fan base?
Yeah, so to me that's not so mysterious. As more facts have come out, and as I understand the commissioner didn't make some of the facts available, or there's just some recent letters which have come out that it sounds like the top leadership of the organization knew about it, or at least knew it existed, and people are obviously they're backpedaling from that. But the surface evidence suggests that a lot of folks knew about it. It wasn't just a rogue actor. So in this paper that we called Towards a Restoration of Trust, and the subtitle was, because academic papers have to have two titles. You can't say it in one word.
Oh, yeah.
The subtitle is Preliminary Insights and Lessons from Wisdom Traditions. And by that we mean, and we looked at the three Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And so like, well, what do these different traditions say? Well, as far as wisdom, not like what their right belief is or their claim to beliefs, but like, how do you live a good life? Like what intelligence, what wisdom is there? So one of the things we say back now to the Houston Astros is that you need to start with, like as a base, are you genuinely repenting? Are you genuinely owning up to it? Or are you still holding back some? Are you still not telling the truth? Because if you're still holding back some and not telling the truth, all you do is dig your hole deeper, your grave deeper. I tell my students, I teach a business ethics class that's called Business Ethics and Modern Religious Thought here at Princeton. And, how students always have nicknames for classes like Art in the Dark or Physics for Poets or, things like that. And they call this How to Succeed Without Selling Your Soul. One of the aphorisms or things I get sort of list of things, don't never forget this. And one of on that long list is early confessions are always less expensive than later confessions. Early confessions are always less expensive than later. So yeah, it's embarrassing. Yeah, it's horrible. But if you're you just got to get it all out. And if you're only releasing new apologies because you've been forced that someone discovered something that you had hidden, it is going to be so hard to rebuild credibility. And you need to take, and we have these sort of 11 theses in this paper, 11 arguments, 11 ideas that are sort of suggestions to think about. And one ought to be really a deep, true confession. And we could use that both in a religious sense of the word or general social sense, as saying, I did the following and I feel terrible about it. And here's what I'm going to do in the time to come to try to make things whole. I mean, can you imagine if they had done something like saying, like if you're a person of honor, you've done something wrong, you might offer to your boss to tender your resignation. They say, come on, I know that was an aberration. You're a good guy. I'm not going to fire you. Just don't do it again. I wonder what would have happened if the Houston Astros had gone to the commissioner and voluntarily offered to give back, rescind their World Series championship. I mean, what a radical idea. I'm sure a lot of people would have been angry if they had done that because no one likes to give up. And sometimes I think fan bases are, win at all costs. But I think that would have been an extraordinary gesture if they did that. And who knows what the commissioner would have said, but it's that sort of thinking outside the box that we find sometimes in religious traditions that help elevate us out of our kind of day-to-day world to think with a bigger mindset.
How do you go from however you grew up to being on the campus of Princeton? I want to talk about your background for a second. How did you grow up, and maybe when did it occur to you, I want to teach at Princeton?
Obviously, standards have slipped that I'm teaching at a school that would never admit me as a student, but that's now, I suspect, for you both and for a lot of people who might be listening to this, that, you may start when you're young out of high school or college and you say, I want to be an X, I want to be a plumber, I want to be a lawyer, I want to go into sales, or I want to be an entertainer, I want to be a musician, whatever it might be. I want to be a CEO. And a couple things happen during life. First of all, life happens, and invariably you'll have some moments of success and failure, which tend to reset the clock, and you might have to take a sharp turn right or left on your plan. Or you may realize it's just not in the cards, that I'm not going to be an NBA basketball player, so what next? And then there's also, you have sometimes, and a little bit in my case, that you meet someone who changes your life, or you have an experience, and sometimes they're painful experiences, or sometimes they're just beautiful, wonderful experiences that tilts your trajectory to a different way. So I can't really answer like how I got here. God's grace, hard work, blessing, good fortune, dumb luck. It's sort of a hybrid. And later, in hindsight, in the rearview mirror, I could see sort of an orchestrated plan, if you will, that it's a bit more clear now that I was in the corporate world for 16 years as a senior executive, working internationally as well, living in London for 8 years. And then you could see later, then I did some theological studies and got my PhD in ethics and all that. And now I can kind of put those two pieces together. But I never would have thought at age 22 or something, I'm going to be in business for 16 years and then study theology and then go work at Princeton. It's just, life doesn't work that way.
I've never been on the campus of Princeton because the security people, they turned me away.
Restraining order, yeah. Still.
But we're good, streaky! Yes! No, sorry. Put on your pants. Sorry, we're good. What sort of reception have you gotten or received? What kind of reception have you received from maybe not your colleagues, but other Ivy League people when they hear you recommending that people look at the Bible for business advice and for wisdom? I mean, has it gone over well? Have people booed? How's it going?
Well, for starters, I frame it a little bit differently. The article, the newspaper article referred to is not how I would describe what I do. So I look at, I'm really interested in wisdom and guidance for life. And if that comes from a scientist, great. If it comes from an artist or a poet, great. If it comes from the Bible, great. So all truth is truth in my view. And I think many people of faith embrace that idea that all truth is God's truth, regardless of the source. So the reason I think this has landed well is that I'm taking a wider view of the question.
What is your relationship like with Philip Morris International? Did they have some sort of involvement in underwriting your study, or walk us through that relationship?
Yeah, well, very simple. First of all, I'm private about discussions I have with any client, whatever consulting work I do. As this was a published paper, I on the front page put a footnote that this is my independent work with my colleague, Michael Tate, that we co-authored it, but we were completely independent in what we wrote. And by the way, the paper isn't about them. It could be any organization. It could be Boeing, who's having some challenges this past year. It could be Wells Fargo Bank, who are still having challenges. It could be a governmental body. It could be the church. It could be a university. So it's written generically for organizations, and I acknowledge up front so that I received compensation to write the paper. Just as full disclosure, as an ethicist, to me, it's just the right thing to do. But I do make clear that the opinions are not that of my university, not that of the client. They're what my colleague and I. They're our opinions based on our research.
Well, I have a lot of questions for you, but I know Dr. Z is going to one-up me here. So, Dr. Z, we have on the phone here, we have Dr. Miller, a guy who
great guy.
Knows clearly a lot about how to gain trust within your organization. You have hundreds of employees there, Z, that you work with, and I think that sometimes you kind of can kind of take the high-level concepts and break it down sometimes to the very simple man like myself, Z. What questions do you have on behalf of all the simple people like me out there that are maybe going, how can I apply this to my life?
Well, I think
can I just say one thing?
Sure.
I gotta say there, Clark. Yeah. I actually have family that hails from Tulsa.
Oh yeah.
So I think you're dumb as a fox when you say simple people. I know how that works. So
Oh.
I'm staying alert here.
All right.
Wow, staying on his toes. He probably drank an energy drink right before this, I think. I mean, he's on fire. He's on
But help me out, Dr. Z. Help me out. What's up?
Well, I tell you what. So this show's really geared for entrepreneurs, business owners, guys, gals that want to start or have started a business. And one of the things that I think happens is trust with a patient or a customer breaks down because one of your employees drops the ball. And I think your concept, and you might dummy it down maybe a little bit for the guy listening out there that has a chiropractic office and he has an irate patient and he's trying to teach his employees how to gain their trust, try to walk them off the ledge, or he himself has been called into it and is faced with the patient that's just, a dentist, an irate patient, a guy that has a tire shop. I mean, someone's out there and they're just swinging haymakers at him, right? Verbally, mentally, physically. Walk them through some steps, just some, quick, easy, like simple steps of how they can get control of the situation and regain trust and maybe turn that ship.
Turn the beat around.
Turn the beat around. Walk us through that, Doctor.
Yeah, so there's no formula, but that'll always work in every situation. But here are a couple of quick things I would say. First is make sure you're listening really carefully and hearing what their complaint is. And if you're a really good listener, often the presenting problem, in other words, what they're screaming at you about, may not be the real problem. It might be a symptom. It might be an outcome of an underlying problem. So if you're really good, you listen to what they're saying and what they might actually be meaning. But because they're so angry, they may not have the composure or the skill to actually articulate what they're upset about. So that's maybe the first thing. Actually, maybe even before that is, if you think of the whole fight or flight reaction that we have as human beings, all your testosterone's flowing and endorphins, you got to control yourself and make sure you don't, out of defensiveness or hurt or angry, likewise sort of lose your temper and start ripping into them or blaming them.
Z, I remember when
so
you.
those are,
Hold on, he's on a roll. I got my doctor on a roll here.
Sorry, Dr. David. There, Z was.
No, hey, call me David, please. But go ahead.
Okay, David. He was scalding me with his eyes because he remembers the last time I accosted a customer about 15 years ago with a megaphone for filing a complaint.
Oh yeah, that was bad. That was
said,
bad
"Put the
mojo."
megaphone
I
down.
said, "Don't."
Sir, stop complaining in our lobby or I will bust you in the head.
Remember that?
Yeah,
Remember that?
I
You said
remember. I
stop.
remember that moment. I remember it was like yesterday. I remember it was like just a couple seconds ago, actually. So.
Oh, sorry about that.
Okay, David, continue on. I'm sorry for the rude megaphone interruption that transpired.
Yeah, I mean, so try to, get someone just to calm down, let them know. And there's another technique. It's simple. This isn't in the paper, but this is kind of common sense to say, let me see if I hear you right. You're saying the following. Is that correct? So they can at least say, well, someone finally heard me. Or no, you son of a gun, you still don't have it right. So you might, take a moment to do that. And so then with a bit of luck, that person knows they've been heard. So they might simmer down a little bit. And then you kind of have to real quickly on the spot figure out, is the person right? And like, oh my gosh, I'm not proud of that. And you might begin to say, well, if this is really the case, of course this needs to be fixed. I'm not proud to hear it, and I'm really glad you told me.
Right.
And based on how simple or complex it is, you could say, let me look into this and come back to you with an update or an answer. But there is sometimes when the complainant, shall we call him or her, is just dead wrong, that they're obnoxious or they're a liar or they're trying to scam you or something.
Sure.
And that's trickier when you have someone who's, whether in good faith or bad faith, inaccurate in what they're describing. And that's a trickier one.
Yeah. Any advice on that one? On the nefarious actions of somebody? Anything you can? Any little gumball, little pearl you can throw our way?
Yeah, I'd have him called Dr. Z.
Ah, there you go. There you go. Good answer.
Back to
Give
you.
Yeah,
him a mega point.
but you got to have a spine and bend but don't break. So if you sense that this is like a known complainer, a known troublemaker, try to always be as courteous as possible. And also tell the truth. And I think if you know on the spot that it's a spurious claim and you don't have to do a lot of research and they're factually wrong, or even if they're right, it still doesn't matter, like they just misunderstand it. I think you could tell them, say, look, I'm sorry, this is how we run our business. This is the policy or whatever it might be, and we're not going to change it. And I understand you're disappointed, and that may mean we're going to lose you as a customer and you'll never come back. Privately, you're saying, I hope they don't. But, you do that. And,
Sure.
And you kind of hold your ground politely.
And you know what? There's a business owner out there that needed to hear that right
Yep.
then and there. They did, because so many people have this concept that the customer's always right, and they're not always right.
Well, exactly. And sometimes, you bite your tongue, and it's easier not to fight it if the costs aren't big enough, and you just, go with it. But sometimes it's, it can be damaging, and actually your employees might feel you don't have their back because they might get a little upset because they're getting run over by a truck all the time, and
right.
and they're saying, like, boss, this just isn't right. You got to stand up. The customer's not always right. So how do we handle it when they're not? And
Right.
Maybe ask your own employees. I back in my corporate days. And when we had various complex problems we were dealing with, the answer usually is with someone on the front lines, and we just had to give them permission and create a culture that they could speak up and not feel embarrassed or afraid of getting shot themselves.
David, we have time for one more question from one of our great show sponsors, Josh with Living Water Irrigation. But before he asks you the question, I want to ask you this. If you are, let's hypothetically, again, these are all hypothetical today, Z.
Hypothetical.
Let's say that you are a woman and you accidentally ripped somebody's...
That is hypothetical.
Yeah. And you hypothetically, in an alternative universe, ripped another man's speech. And then let's say that you are another person who's the president of another country who hypothetically said something that made you so mad that made you want to rip the speech. So we have two parties that can't get along here. What advice would you have for either the man who's given the speech that makes the lady so mad she wants to rip the speech, or to the person who's ripping the speech? What advice would you have for those two hypothetical people? How do they regain trust? Is it hugging? Is it side hugging? Do they need to
Fist bump?
What is the for these hypothetical situations? What would you recommend for these two? We'll call them Pelosi and Trump. These hypothetical people.
And I had somebody behind me who was mumbling terribly, mumbling. Wah, wah, ho, ha.
And I had not been, shall we say, enthusiastic about the divisiveness that would occur from a impeachment, weighing the equities. I had said then, he's not worth impeaching because it's even going to divide the country further than he has already divided it.
What advice would you have for
Those are
those
weird
two to
names to
work
make up,
together
yeah.
to build trust? Do you have any advice?
So several folks over the years have said to me on and off, like, "Wow, what you're doing, with the corporate world, it's just really great stuff. It's important. Keep it up. Thank you." Have you ever thought of going to D.C.? Because D.C. needs these kind of ideas and thoughts. And at which point I say that famous line from the Monty Python movie, "Run away, run away." It's not my space. Everyone has your sweet spot. You stay in your sweet spot. You guys are radio guys and podcast guys in this media. Should you be in Hollywood and doing movies? Maybe, I don't know. But this is your my sweet spot's the corporate world. So I'm going to take a pass on that one. I could think a lot of things, but I'm going to take a pass.
I'm going to recommend
our
they
faces
do
are really
side
built
hugs.
more for radio, by the way. So.
Here's what I recommend. This is my tip, and I'll go to you, Josh. I would recommend that Trump, Tastic, and Pelosi, they sit down together, and they do paper, rock, scissors. And then whoever wins best of three, they say, "You're fine. You're good.
You're good.
You're good. We move on. We're good.
You're good.
Josh, back to you.
Hey, Dr. Miller. So my question would be, sir, a lot of people, when you bring up the Bible or Christianity or Jesus Christ, they immediately shut down or immediately want to exit the conversation. So I obviously believe in these biblical truths and foundations and principles, but how do you segue or how do you present these truths without turning somebody off or shutting somebody down simply because it is Christianity or the Word of God?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. So if, as you self-describe who you are and what you believe in, and but if your goal is to have them hear your message and not be turned off, then I think we all can practice with our vocabulary and find the same words, kind of non-churchy words, to make your point. Because if you're drawing on biblical wisdom, be it a proverb, let's say, or some other part of the Old or New Testament, maybe you don't start by saying, "Well, the Bible says the following," because that person may not believe in the Bible, and right there the conversation's over. But you know what the point is of what that verse is you might be drawing on, or what that parable is. So find a non-religious or churchy way to say it. Because I think you're right. Because if you're doing business in Tulsa or Timbuktu or Thailand or wherever it might be, you want to invite someone into a conversation and not lose them after your first sentence. And I don't think that, by the way, invalidates what you believe. I don't think you're compromising yourself or you're not being true to your faith. You're just finding a different way to talk about it.
That's awesome, Dr. Miller. Thank you.
No, my pleasure.
For the listeners out there that want to know more about you and to follow your work and to maybe deep dive into it more, what do they need to Google search to find your papers, or what website would you recommend they go to? Because I know we've got people out there that want to learn more about you and the work that you have been putting together and then the research you've been doing over the years. Where can they find more about you?
Well, probably the easiest is our website here at Princeton. It's called Faith and Work, all written out, faithandwork.princeton.edu, faithandwork.princeton.edu, and you'll come up to our sort of our team there. There's videos of different leaders that I've interviewed, people in the C-suite, hear how they tapped into their faith tradition as a sort of a true north or an anchor in their life. So a lot of our publishing work is there, or point you to different things we've done. That's probably the best place to go.
And just in case, for full disclosure, because we like to authenticate everything that's said on our show to the Thrive Nation.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Tulsa is a city in Oklahoma, in the country of the United States of America. Thailand is a country in Asia. And Timbuktu is a city in the country of Mali, which is in Western Africa. So if you're doing business in any one of those three things, then what he says applies. I just want full disclosure, because someone may be saying, "Where's Timbuktu?"
That's a money mega tip.
That's
a money mega tip. Some people didn't even know there was a market they could be marketing to.
they could be in Western Africa doing business. It's business time there.
David, we appreciate you so much, my friend. Thank you for allowing us to virtually step onto the campus of Princeton there. And then everybody out there, if you have not yet checked it out, go to faithandwork.princeton.edu. That's faithandwork.princeton.edu. And again, David, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to be on the show.
Well done. Well done.
Well, hey, you guys are great. This is one of the most enjoyable interviews I've done ever, so it's great fun. Thank you, man.
Hey, take care.
All right, buddy. Take care.
And now, without any further ado, 3, 2, 1, boom!